So we can do.
I see lots of folks have found the coffee, so please return for a refill if you need it. And there's also some pastries back there. So, Johnny, if you're listening, thank you for the breakfast this morning. That's right. Well, I'm so glad and grateful to see all of you. Thank you guys for being here. My name is Mary Kate Sykes. I am one of the pastoral residents here at Covenant, for those of you who I haven't met. And I want to share a special word of welcome to anyone who is visiting with us today. Thank you for being here, and we're so glad to have you. We are also so glad, thrilled to welcome writer, poet, and speaker Cole Arthur Riley this morning. Cole's visit here falls in line with Covenant's year-long theme of grounded and growing. And right now, we're in this growing season. And Cole brings with her an invitation to grow as we think about how to expand our thinking around spirituality, liturgy, and prayer. I'd like to share just a few things about Cole by way of introduction, and then I will hand things over. Cole is the creator of Black Liturgies, which is a space that, to use Cole's words, integrates spiritual practice with Black emotion, Black literature, and the Black body. She is also the author of Black Liturgies, which was released this past January and is beautiful. Many of the folks at Covenant have been engaging with this work over the season of Lent. Cole is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, This Here Flesh. And both of these beautiful works of art will be for sale following this hour together. As many of you know, Cole writes with stunning beauty, with radical honesty, and with invitation. It's art. And if you've engaged with her work, you know that Cole draws inspiration, and we might say grounding, from Black ancestors. And I'd like to lift up the words of American poet Amiri Baraka to describe how I have encountered Cole's work. The artist's role is to raise the consciousness of the people, to make them understand life, the world, and themselves more completely. That's how I see it. Otherwise, I don't know why you do it. Cole, I have encountered your work as work that raises the consciousness of the people. It's raised my consciousness. Your work has also helped me grow in my understanding of the divine and how to speak and write of the divine. And for all of this, I hold a lot of gratitude. So it is our privilege to have you here with us today. In just a moment, we're going to hear from Cole, and then we'll have a brief time for some Q&A. So scattered throughout the room are some pens and paper. So if you have a question, you can write that down, and we'll collect those for the Q&A towards the end. May this hour be one in which we grow in our understanding of one another, and may it be an hour in which we grow in our understanding of who God is and who God is calling us to be. Cole, thank you for being here.
Hello. Thank you. And thanks for that introduction, Mary Kate. Um, I've never had an Amiri Baraka quotation precede me, but I'm grateful for it. I love that quotation in particular. So I hold that close. And thank you for you all for being in this space together and with me. Um, I'm going to speak for about 35 minutes. And as Mary Kate said, then we're going to do questions. If you don't have a question, you can also put in tensions or ideas that kind of stir in you as I speak. And I'm going to talk to you about the journey to this book I've just written. So, again, I'm Cole. I am a writer, I'm a poet on my best days. And I come to you from Ithaca, New York, so upstate New York. But I was born and for the most part raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So in the city, raised by my father, my grandma, aunts, uncles, eventually a stepmother, alongside siblings and cousins, of which we made no differentiation because we all lived with each other at different times, off and on. And I come from a very excitable, very funny, charming family of extroverts. My grandma used to say, "We Arthurs are nothing if not sound. We're nothing if not sound." And she would talk how if we were all in the same store, she could pinpoint where each one of us was because everyone is just so loud and big and charismatic and expressive and good with people. And then I came along. So out comes this quiet soul of a child. When I was young, I wasn't very verbal. I actually had something called selective mutism, which, if you don't know, that's an type of anxiety disorder. It's most commonly found in children where you feel unable to speak in certain settings. For me, that looked like any place that wasn't around my immediate household or family. And even as I kind of learned how to cope with that and got into speech therapy, I remained a very quiet child. There are many family stories of me just wandering off and hiding in laundry baskets and closets, reading Goosebumps books. I used to carry around a notepad and pass notes to my father and sister if other people were in our presence. So very quiet child, very near to my own interior world as well. I think many shy children are. I was very uh, situated in my own inner life in beautiful and terrible ways, pretty sad as well. Um, my family says two things about me. I was born a skeptic and I was a sad child. I say I had an emotionally robust life. But it would not be uncommon to watch a family home video of the Arthurs and the cameras on everyone kind of laughing and dancing in the kitchen, and it pans to like 6-year-old Cole staring out of a window kind of wistfully. So that was me, and I was distinct in that way. And because of, I mean, when you're young, the things that make you distinct are some of your earliest portals to shame. And it was that way for me. It was one of the earliest forms of alienation I experienced. Um, I also was a strange child. I don't want to just give you this quiet version. I mean, queer in every sense of the word. I would take expired condiments from our fridge and mix potions in the basement and in the slide out back and like grind old food. And I had all of these rituals. If you happen to read my first book, This Year Flesh, I tell the story about one of the only friends I had. Her name, I call her Boo. And these recess rituals we would do, or we would kind of bow and gesture and eat icing and talk to the clouds. So this is me. Rich interior life, a child of mysticism and ritual, but you know, I didn't have many friends. You know, and I love my family, but as I mentioned, I didn't feel a sense of belonging in my family, and a kind of loneliness is born in you, um, until eventually you grow to resent the things in you that make you distinct, kind of, and so I did, and I learned to abandon them, not just you know how I communicated with the world or you know my sadness, but I abandoned my sense of self. And I retreated into my mind. I retreated into books and knowledge and things to kind of shield me from the pain of rejection, the pain of alienation. I retreated into my mind, but I emptied it of all magic. So fast forward to college, and this was the first time I found myself consistently in white dominated spaces apart from ballet classes, but the first time consistently in this white dominated, specifically white intellectual space. And I began to practice shape shifting. You know, everyone says you go to college to find yourself, you know, you choose who you want to be. And um, so I did. I chose to morph myself into a version of myself that would be palatable to whiteness. Um, and specifically white Christianity, which I had kind of wandered into. I started going to church in college. I didn't grow up in the church, and I did no research about what church I would attend. I quite literally just went to the most obvious looking church structure on campus and walked in. Um, and I began to construct myself. You know, I tried to be a bit more witty. I changed the cadence of my speech. Um, the music I listened to. I pretended to care a great deal about the theologies of dead white men who really hated me and my blackness. Um, and so but I did what I could to construct myself, and I was quite successful at that construction, um, in terms of achieving a kind of belonging. However cruel and demanding that belonging was, I achieved it, and at no small cost. And what I wish I knew then was that claiming one's true self is actually not a matter of construction or choosing, it's a matter of listening. Uh, there's a commencement address that Howard Thurman gave at Spelman College in 1980. It's gone on to be known as the Sound of the Genuine. I suspect some of you may be familiar with it, um, but receive some of it now. He says, there is something in every one of you that waits, listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And if you cannot hear it, you will never find whatever it is for which you are searching. And if you hear it and then do not follow it, it was better that you had never been born. And if you cannot hear the sound of the genuine in you, you will all your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. There is in you something that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And sometimes there's so much traffic going on in your minds, so many different kinds of signals, so many vast impulses floating through your organism that go back thousands of generations, long before you were even a thought in the mind of creation, and you are buffeted by these. And he says, in the midst of all this, you've got to find out what your name is. Who are you? How does the sound of the genuine come through to you? What he's getting at here is what people before him and others after him have called kind of the true self, the false self dichotomy. um I think Thurman at the core is kind of saying that we have a moral imperative, and certainly a spiritual imperative, to locate one's true self. It's an anti-delusion practice. I don't want to oversimplify it. Much has been written about kind of the true self and false self. um, I think there are all kinds of reasons we construct false selves. Some of us desire belonging, some of us survival, some of us absolution. um, Some of us are dealing in shame, in denial. But I think whatever that origin is, the false self too often survives by the bread of self-hatred. Self-hatred's undeniably entangled in this. Now, once you start making your false self appear real, like I did with these trappings, the cadence of your speech, the music that you listen to, after a bit of time, it becomes very difficult to just start to rend real from unreal, to just call upon her. And I think this is what Thurman knew so acutely, that we will not become real apart from a deep listening, a deep and habitual listening, because I don't know how much of our selfhoods are actually static. Now, if you listen closely to the passage from Thurman's address, you heard him say, if you do not locate the sound of the genuine in yourself, you will find yourself on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. Who's pulling the strings? Those metaphorical strings have everything to do with how injustice and indignity are perpetuated in the world. When you are poorly attuned to your own self, the stories that have formed you, the fears, the desires, how will you know what compels you to vote for a particular candidate, to care about certain policies, to confess or not confess? You know, I say if I am to survive, if my dignity is to be honored, I need you to become unflinchingly honest about yourself, about who you are, what has made you. I don't benefit from your false self, nor do you mine. And if I'm going to get free, I need you to get free. And those strings Thurman speaks of, those strings are chains. Black liturgies for me was and is a shedding of those chains, of those strings. Um, if you read my first book, This Here Flesh, you'll know I was 26 when I became sick. Uh, I live with chronic illness and pain and have a story of a lot of fear and uncertainty in the body specifically. And anyone in the room who shares that story, which there are others, or knows what it means to occupy a body that feels like a stranger to you, to be afraid of, the total unknown of it, you will know that it takes you to places. You know, I lived most of my days in bed for about a year and off and on in seasons since during particular flare ups. And it takes you to places, what you hope for, what you desire, what you dream. Uh, I know I'm not actually afraid of going blind. I'm afraid of being obsolete. It takes you to places. And something about, being in bed, coming to the end of myself in that way, I was confronted with myself. And, you spend a lot of time in bed in thought. I have issues with my eyes, so I don't have the luxury that I once did of escaping into reality TV and, or even books anymore. Uh, because of my eyes, I often just have to lie there still and just be with myself. And in the beginning of that, I slowly began to remember myself, all of the compromises one makes in order to achieve belonging fall away in seasons like that. You know, in that silence, I had no choice but to listen. And what I encountered was a person who desperately needed to travel into her own interior world again. And that journey into my interior, I don't say it in the way that it's just a purely mental exercise. It was a journey of emotion. It was a journey of the body. It was intergenerational. It's not to be conflated with a kind of mission of self-absorption or even mental clarity. It was a becoming honest in every way. Now, I should say that sometimes the journey into your interior world is actually the journey away from spaces of false belonging. This was the case with me, so it's not without loss. The closer, this is what I found at least, the closer you get to your true self, the more you will disturb the waters of someone else's false self. people don't tend to like this. They don't tend to like to be confronted with their false self in the presence of something real. You know, if I have to wear a mask, I'm going to demand that of you. I'm going to make you have to bear the weight of a mask. They might not love to see you decolonizing your interior landscape. They might not love to hear what you really believe or don't believe about heaven and hell, about trans lives, about your own face, you know. So often the journey to reclaiming an interior dignity, or at least a journey with any concern for one's true self, is it comes at a relational cost. Um, I left spaces that were in service to my false self, you know, spaces that demanded I sacrifice myself, my Blackness, my queerness, my doubts on the altar of belonging. Spaces that, you know, espouse a singular way of the divine and required me to believe all the same things as its spiritual leaders in order to retain belonging. Uh, I fled them all. I fled. I didn't try to save anyone. I saved myself. I fled. And I don't want to pretend like it wasn't a painful departure. You know, my grandma would say liberation is painful. And the pain, I think, is it's only magnified for those of us who are kind of born into those spaces. The journey for me in many ways wasn't as hard because I wasn't born into those particular spaces. I was born in a home that was quite expansive, open-handed, liberating, and even still that departure for me was costly. And so I can't emphasize enough that, you know, if you learn anything from my story, it's not like ripping off a band-aid. I think liberating one's interior world is not a destination as much as it is the journey itself. It takes time, and it takes time because there's real risk and real grief and real relationships at stake. And I think we can move both in urgency and protection of our true selves and with compassion for all of the things that have made us terrified to approach it. Okay, but why liturgy? Like, we brought you here to talk about prayer. Um, why liturgy? So now at this point in my life, I had actually already fallen in love with liturgy. So after college, I ended up working in a role that was in partnership with a small Catholic university and an Episcopal church. So I was around it all the time. You know, I went in deep, and I had just moved from Pittsburgh for the first time and was recovering from, you know, a campus ministry in a church that used me more than loved me, and in a season of life with my family that was taking a unique toll. And I was tired. I was exhausted. Um, and I'll actually read a little to you from the book about that season, about my first liturgy encounter. That's okay. I was 23 when I walked into an Episcopal church with an overwhelming desire to die. The service began with a hymn. 24 elderly choir members hovered above us from the loft, singing words I couldn't make out, which has its own way of making you feel alone. But then all around me, people began to speak the liturgy aloud. Blessed be God, and blessed be God's kingdom, now and forever. As the voices began their recitation, a few things occurred in me at once. First, defiance. The atoms of me surged in resistance to recite words like some mindless zombie. I had my own thoughts, my own idealized individualism to protect. The second, chills. The voices of the room blurred together, all speaking in unison. How strange this landed on the senses. What cult was this? Liturgy can feel eerie, especially to those of us who know what it is to have a mob chant words in unison, not for beauty or mystery, but for destruction. But the third, relief, complicated and undeniable relief. It can be difficult to find the words to pray when one wants to die. The independence of personal prayer required more imagination than I could access at that time. It's exhausting enough trying to keep oneself alive, to be expected to articulate love and hope and beauty, and more dangerously, lament was like trying to float with weights hanging from the neck. Liturgy, I found, was a kind of rest. For the first time, my presence in a spiritual space didn't depend on my own articulation or imagination. I could rise and sit and kneel and speak or not speak in the sacred theater that others had written the script for. I could let others hold a sacred imagination for me. To be clear, liturgy in no way saved me, nor was it even a remedy to my depression, but it was an anchor, something that kept me from drifting helplessly into my own interior current. Ritual, when coupled with beauty, makes for a very adequate mooring. It won't carry you to shore, but it will keep you close enough that hope can swim out to visit you regularly. And so it was that I fell in love with liturgy, specifically written liturgy. And apart from the fact that the writer, as a writer, I love the language, I love the beauty and craft of the book of Common Prayer that I was encountering. But it gave me a form. It gave me a real form to connect with the divine, and in a time when my imagination for the divine had waned. And what I didn't know then was that years later, I would begin to write my own liturgies, the same pen that used to write and pass notes to her father and sister when I was too afraid to speak in public, would begin sharing those liturgies to thousands of others online. Why Black? Why Black liturgies? So the summer of 2020, we are in the deep and earliest parts of despair in the pandemic and the lockdown. And so many of us were experiencing a unique kind of isolation. I think I was, and in that isolation, craving community in a new way and having all of these revelations about what precise kind of life and community we were willing to return to. That's why everyone left their jobs, and at the same time, it was a seasoning of global reckoning, or what appeared to be a global reckoning around anti-Blackness after a slew of very publicized Black deaths at the hands of white police and white pseudo vigilantes. So Elijah McClain had been taken from us. The Breonna Taylor's murder resurfaced, Ahmaud Arbery, and then of course George Floyd. And it appeared as if the world was prepared to pay attention. And I think many people, many Christians, spiritual people looked around and realized maybe we aren't as safe as we think we are. By the time this, season came, I was so near to myself that I knew without much thought at all that the Book of Common Prayer, for all its beauty, was just going to be incapable of speaking to the Black interior in a way that felt honest. I know what was happening to my ancestors when Thomas Cranmer wrote the Book of Common Prayer in the 16th century. I know what limited imagination he probably possessed for bodies like mine, and in the Black interior world. And so, I logged onto an Episcopal church service the Sunday after George Floyd's murder went viral, and I logged off about 7 minutes later. And so was born Black Liturgies out of a season of a lot of rage, a lot of doubt, and a lot of what Thurman would call a deep listening. I wanted to write liturgies that attempted at least a practice of Black interiority that centered Black emotion, Black memory, the Black body. And I was looking for a way to get free and to find company for what freedom I'd already attained. So this is the part of college I haven't told you about. while I was in college, busy shape shifting and uh, listening to the theologies of dead white men and squirming in church pews that weren't meant for my body. All the while, I was having a second awakening in the classroom. So I studied writing and literature in college and was meeting some other voices for the first time. I was meeting Toni Morrison. I was meeting Alice Walker, Zora Neale Hurston, Richard Wright, um, James Baldwin, all for the first time. And at the same time, I had begun attending that white dominated conservative church and kind of was bowing to a very white and demanding God. I was encountering the spirituality of the Black novel. And, you know, I was in the clearing of Beloved. I don't know if anyone's read Beloved by Toni Morrison. I was in the clearing. I was in the shanties and their eyes were watching God. And these places and these texts, they were simultaneously becoming kind of sacred texts to me as well. And I managed to stay close. I had the white noise of the spirituality that in contrast was much less concerned with telling me what precisely to believe about God and much more interested in questions. So Toni Morrison in Beloved, the famous matriarch in Beloved is Baby Suggs. And Toni Morrison says, Baby Suggs, she gives this famous sermon in the book. She doesn't tell them to go and sin no more. She doesn't give this traditional gospel message to these people that had known slavery. She calls them to awaken to the body. And she gives some subversive rhetoric. And Toni Morrison, she's not really interested in telling you what doctrine to profess. She's only interested if you'll come to the center of the clearing when called, if you'll weep, if you'll dance, if you'll collapse with among different generations. And Black literature was much more concerned with questions of spirituality that brought me nearer to self, questions that brought me nearer to divine. And so all along I had this tether. And with Black liturgies, I reclaimed it and integrated it. I began to integrate it into a spirituality that was a little bit more fluid, sometimes imprecise, expansive, but no less real. And I reclaimed the mysticism of my child self a little bit, the ritual, the magic. And I began sharing fragments of Black literature from Black poets, novelists, activists, and connecting them with this practice of written prayer that I had grown to love, and eventually breath prayer as well. I began sharing them online in the hopes that I would find, a dozen or so others who were interested in liturgy and contemplation that didn't come at the expense of one's Blackness. And I quickly found that much more than a dozen others were on that journey. And Black Liturgies is now a community of thousands. And through them, I've had the privilege of creating this physical artifact, this book, which contains so much of what began in them. We're going to get to questions. I'm letting my spirituality be strange. Okay. If I'm trusting in Black literary ancestors to ground me in a tradition that doesn't want to destroy me. I'm trusting in my body, my breath, as just as credible prayer as my words. And I'm questioning all the ways we allow our souls to be drowned out and silenced by the terrors of this world. If I've accomplished some of that in this book, then I'm proud to close by reading. I'll read a poem from it. It's from the dignity section. And then if you have questions, have them ready. This is called Terracotta, and I wrote it. It's the only poem in the book I didn't write during the time I wrote the book. I wrote it when I was in the pits of sickness, a day after a spinal tap, actually. It's called Terracotta. All the empty bowls are beginning to wonder why I keep shattering them on marble countertops because my hands aren't what they were. I was still collecting shards when you called me to say there's no such thing as collapsed lungs from speaking too loud, but that you shouldn't sleep with your chin tucked into your own chest, and you should never dream with your mouth open, letting anything make its home in you. And I remember something about the way my father held the mirror, saying, "If it's a storm, you're the lightning." His sparkling sunken eyes waiting above the backwards me, he lifts my chin up by a string. All the empty bowls are beginning to wonder why I hold these hands like a miracle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cole. We will come around and collect questions. I might get Grace to help me collect those. And I'll start by, well, first and foremost, thank you. I think I can tell from those gathered here that you've given us lots to think about. And, you know, one of the ideas that I love that you've shared just now is that liturgy functions for us as rest, as an anchor. That's a beautiful description. And in all of your liturgies, one thing that you've included is breath prayers. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about why you chose to include breath prayers in your liturgy, and how do you hope for that to function for people in their spirituality?
Yes. So, I mean, I got on social media and started telling a bunch of people to listen to their bodies and care about embodiment. And I was like keenly aware of the fact that I was doing this through social media, which kind of survives by our disembodiment and our disconnection. And I didn't start Black liturgies sharing breath practices. And I think a few months in, I started including them. I had been practicing them myself for some years, but I started including them in hopes that, you know, people would pause maybe, and as some people say they do. I like to believe and imagine they do, that they would pause when they come across them and actually subvert the expectation of scrolling and get connected and in your own body again. I want it to be a kind of visitation like that when people encounter a Black liturgy. And that's important. I mean, for those of us who have been taught a Christian rhetoric that has demanded we sacrifice our bodies for God far more than we were taught to lie down by still waters in the valley of the shadow of death, or eat and drink. And so I think it's important to kind of stand in defiance against that singular way of connecting with the divine, and realize that the path to the sacred is just as much in our bodies. It's just as much in the physical as it is with kind of our mental realm, or this imprecise interior world that I'm getting at. Yeah. Love breath practice.
All right, I've got a couple more from folks. What do you see as the difference in Black liturgy and white liturgy?
I just think it's what's centered. You know, I try to say I'm not trying to really reinvent the wheel as others assume. I think I mean, the Book of Common Prayer isn't the only white liturgy, but I think there's merit in it, even though it was used in, the historians might be cringing. It was used in really terrible, oppressive ways. But I think the words and the craft of the words themselves are beautiful. But a Black liturgy centers the Black interior world, and unapologetically. And I don't think the Book of Common Prayer needs to apologize for itself, that it wasn't capable to speak to Black grief in the wake of George Floyd's murders. That's not what I'm asking. The frustration comes when we're unwilling to entertain a different way, unwilling to, you know, kill our darlings, so to speak, as Emily Dickinson would say, and say, actually, I can use a different path, that there are many forms to connecting with God, and I'm going to choose one that feels honest to me.
One of your prayers, I think you say many paths can be holy at once. And that's what I hear you saying. All right, this is a cool question. What was your most challenging liturgy to write and why? And then the flip side of that, which was the easiest for you, the most fluid to write as though it poured out of you?
Yeah. The one that comes to mind as the hardest would be on mortality. Um, I mean, I've been sick enough that I've entertained my own end, maybe more than other 33-year-olds. But at the end of the day, I am 33, and I was trying to speak to an aging person's experience in the world. And um the feeling of being made obsolete, the feeling of your body becoming unfamiliar, the feeling of the fetishization of youth that surrounds every aspect of American society. I'm trying to speak of all those things while knowing I just haven't lived enough. I haven't known enough years to necessarily be able to speak to mortality in a very credible way, or to aging in that way. So that was very difficult. I have two of my good friends are over the age of 60. They would not like for me to share their age in public, but two of my good friends are over the age of 60, and I stayed really close to them. That I wrote that the time I was writing that section, I stayed really close to them, and tried to listen to them and make the pilgrimage. There's a beautiful, I don't want to answer this too longly, but there's a beautiful part of that Howard Thurman speech, The Sound of the Genuine, where he says it's possible that if I hear the sound of the genuine in me and you hear the sound of the genuine in you, that it's possible for me to go down in me and come up in you. And having made that pilgrimage, we can see each other through each other's eyes. I just think it didn't have to do with my talk at that point, but it's such a beautiful aspect of like an interior journey to know that, okay, and going down into me, it also involves a pilgrimage out at times. And so I tried my best to journey into um, the elderly and aging people in my midst, and listen carefully to what they were saying. The easiest is probably lament. I think my brand is kind of sadness at this point. Goodness, if you if you go to the Google reviews, I don't know if this is still the case for this here flesh, the like trending word is like crying, tears, sad. Like I'm like, okay, well, I found my people, but sadness is not a difficult journey for me to make. I possess joy, but I can be a bit too serious at times and a bit too near to sorrow. But it's easier for me to write from. Yeah.
Thank you. Could you speak a bit about the overlap or intersection of poetry and spirituality for you personally? And bonus, share some favorite poets you've been enjoying lately.
Yes. I'd love to. So poetry for me, I mean, I probably feel closest to the poetry in the book than any other part of it. Uh, I think there's something really beautiful in the heart of a poet that is so undemanding. I mean, it's not a practice of teaching or indoctrination in the slightest. The poet does not care. It is more a conveyance of the human experience. And it's not interested in resolving, it's not trying to tell a story that resolves. It's fragments of often the human experience, or the experience with the natural world even. And I find a lot of beauty and rest in a kind of form for connecting with God that doesn't ask for that resolve or that resolution or things to kind of be wrapped up neatly. I love fragments. I think that they're worth paying attention to. And um, some of my favorite poets, so a lot. Dinez Smith. I skipped this part in my talk, but I was going to talk about, read a little poem from Christian Wyman, who I just think is wonderful. And one of the only Christian books I read when I was departing those like toxic spaces was a book he wrote called My Bright Abyss. Everyone asked me about deconstruction. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. I just fled. I didn't flee into a different, set of theologians. I fled to the artists. But along the way, Christian Wyman is a poet, So I read a book by him called My Bright Abyss, which is based on a poem that says, "My God, my bright abyss, into which all my longings go. Once more, I've come to the end of all I know, and believing nothing, believe in this." It just ends. It ends with a colon, so he doesn't say what he actually believes in. And it's a book about doubt and trying to release yourself from narrow constructions of who God is, and it's beautiful. But love Christian Wyman's work. Lucille Clifton, June Jordan, if you are into really kind of political and emotionally tapped in poetry. June Jordan is not a like escapist poet. She's in it, you know. She's talking about bombs dropping and yeah, she's great. There's probably others that I'm forgetting to name. Yeah.
This is a good follow-up to that. What feeds your imagination and encourages your creativity? What nourishes you?
Mm. Um, to give a general answer, I think looking back, almost in paradox, is it's in paradox feeds my imagination for looking forward. When I'm really grounded in memory and practices of remembrance, it is a lot easier for me to retain imagination for going on, for continuing to exist, and for things when you remember that you're not the first to suffer, that you weren't the first to suffer, to cry, to survive, you know, and that my ancestors found a way to survive. That does wonders for the imagination, or hope, if you want to call it that. um I guess something more specific than just memory feeds my imagination. um I would say children, you know, uh, not in the cliche like children will save us. Maybe they will, but more the um like a child's energy, a child's defiance, you know, they're just so disinterested in being confined in their bodies and their emotions. Like they want to do what they want to do. They want to stand when they want to stand. They want to sit when they want to sit. And something about a child's possession of their body and emotions helps me to, you know, retain imagination for what that could look like in me. Yeah.
I'm sure the parents in the room can probably agree with that one. How did your search for self, the sound of the genuine in you, cause people to see themselves?
Yeah. I'll speak to one. Should I speak to a specific? Yeah, I'll speak to one specific relationship. Of there's a person who's very near to me, and was I found them in the season that I was, you know, shape shifting and pretending to be all kinds of things in college. And I didn't know, but so were they. So were they pretending. He's a gay friend of mine, and had to pretend and give away a lot of himself in college. And when I began my own process of kind of reclamation and finding myself, it's not so much that I, you know, believe that it was that I ignited that in him. It was more that I was able to recognize that. We were able to recognize that in each other, and you kind of like make eye contact along the way on the path and realize like, oh, I know you. And I thought I knew you, but I didn't know you either. And so those spaces that feel so toxic or so demanding, sometimes there are people in it that are feeling the same weight of that and looking for a way to be free. And we were close in college, and neither of us, you know, spoke about it. Neither of us knew. And still we found ourselves again and found each other again on the other side. And so I think that's beautiful, not just to say that you can ignite that journey into someone else, but I think you certainly can recognize it. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll do 2 more questions. I would love to hear your thoughts as to why your particular experiences resonate with people from so many different backgrounds.
Three to me, it's I don't know, I have ideas. I think that a lot of times we think that that speaking about the things that transcend, like the things that unite us all, is what is going to bring in a bunch of different kinds of people. And when I started Black Liturgies, I mean, it's in the title. you know where it's coming from. And even when I wrote This Year Flesh, I'm going so specifically into almost mundane stories in my particular family, my particular father. But I think truly what tends to really grab people is particularity. It's not often the kind of sanitized collective, we're all in it together stories. But when someone encounters a story with grave particularity, I think it feels more honest. And even if they can't immediately resonate with every part of it, it guides them into some kind of honesty with themselves. And it's easier to see yourself in a story that's particular than vague, I think. So that's my guess, is that it's happening because I'm not meaning for it to happen. I'm not trying to reach every person. And in that way, maybe it makes the work a little more attractive. Yeah.
That's a perfect segue to the last topic we'd love to hear you speak on. The end of your book, The End of Black Liturgies, closes with a section titled A Liturgical Template for Alternative Occasions. So you've included liturgies for lots of different occasions throughout the year. There's one for dawn and for dusk, so times of day. But you write in that closing section that that your words can't be the words for all people, that this book doesn't include all of the liturgies. So could you just share a little bit about why you felt called to include that section, and maybe walk us through what it looks like as an invitation to maybe try that on our own?
Yes. Thanks for asking. So yeah, it's right in the back of the book. I give this little template for doing it yourself. My editor was shocked. He was like, "You've given us something practical. This isn't like you. Who told you to do this?" I'm like, I don't know what came over me. Um, but I think it's the limits of liturgical artifacts in the past have been that they're so often curated and written by a singular person and a singular voice. And then it's demanded that everyone else then adopt that text and an entire group of people. And so, of course, I'm very aware that this whole book is born out of me. Of course, I've done what Toni Morrison says is like a practice of imagination for the interior lives of the people that came before me and who are next to me. But um, there are days that you've lived that I have not lived, things that you know that I do not know. And I think that liturgy at its best is held in the collective, in the arms of the collective. And the more we can complicate it with other people's experiences and days and, doubts, the better. So yes, I've included this template here. I'll run through it quickly. Well, I don't need to give details really, but it includes an invitation. It includes some wisdom from the ancestors. They don't have to be my ancestors, but people who are meaningful for you that can be trusted. Not all ancestors can. And select, some quotations or things that they've left you with. I think a lot of times we think the text that we include in our liturgies has to be the Bible. I'm not quick to demean that use. The Bible is a wonderful text, but I think depending on your setting, there are many texts that we could use, that we don't have to shy away from, if that feels safer for the communities you're leading. So some kind of text, some amount of truth telling. You could use the word confession, but again, not everyone identifies with that. Some words of mercy or pardon, and some words of dreaming. Of like, what are the petitions you would make to the divine, to God? And of course, there's a little pattern for breath prayer in there as well. But yeah, I think to be liberated spiritually, when I talk about my work being a work of spiritual liberation, it means that I don't need you to think the same things as I do or have the same experience with God as I do. And that's okay. And not everyone will feel compelled to pick up the pen, and that's okay. I'm not so arrogant to think that liturgy is for everyone. It just isn't. But for those of us who, writing is a way to connect, writing feels like a sincere way to connect, I would say, yeah, try for yourself. It's an invitation only. Yeah.
Would you join me in thanking Cole? Are you wanting to close in prayer for us? Before I give a few final notes about what's happening after this, I'd love to invite Cole to close us in prayer.
This is from the section on dignity. This is a prayer for being human. God of Shalom, here we are dangling one another from the precipice without care or concern for our collective fate. We have lost sight of our own faces, risking our humanity in favor of supremacy. Guide us away from the edge of our undoing. Show us what it means to be people of deep and abiding reverence for the beauty and connectedness of everything, everywhere. Train us out of habits of degradation and artifice, incessantly competing to be worth more, to be loved more. Remind us that the dust beneath us transcends our own humble existence, and let our hardened exteriors soften in the presence of safety. May any honor we've withheld from one another be doubled in the presence of reparation and forgiveness. We won't get free alone. Keep us human. Amen.
Thank you, Cole. As Cole makes her way over to where we've got a couple of books for sale. Nope. Okay. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. So Cole's going to be over here. We're selling both her books, so Black Liturgies and This Here Flesh. I think some folks brought their own copies too, which is wonderful, and Cole will be signing those. And then just two invitations. We would love for you to stay for worship. So we have an 11 o'clock service in the sanctuary, which is just across the way. And then there is a service in here as well, which is a family service. And we would be delighted if you would join us for either of those. Because this space will be transitioning, we'll have a couple things that need to take place and a team that's going to do that. So I just ask that you make your way kind of to the perimeters of the room so that we can transition. Thank you all for being here. Go in peace.